Welcome into the New Orleans Saints podcast. You'll hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and writers that cover the NFL on a daily basis. The New Orleans Saints podcast starts right now. Here's your host, Erin Summers.
Welcome into the New Orleans Saints podcast, coming at you live from Irvine, California. Erin Summers here along with Todd Graffagnini. We will both be here every day, every practice. We'll have a show that will air on your view live every morning at the start of practice. Of course, that's going to be a little bit later back in New Orleans because of the time difference. But after practices, we'll have interviews, tons of content, and a daily podcast so you don't miss anything while you're here. There's a lot of question marks heading into training camp. We saw a lot of players take the field over OTAs. Everybody that could participate wasn't in attendance during mini camp, a month ago. So we definitely have a lot to get to, Graf, as we head into training camp starting tomorrow. What are you looking for as we take the field?
Well, first of all, it's hard to believe that we're about to get into this grind again, and it is a grind. Training camp is a grind despite being out on the West Coast. It is a business trip, and this is the official real beginning to the 2024 football season. So the Saints have got to accomplish a lot of things in a very short amount of time. And look, when you're going through it, it is a grind, but you know as well as I do. I mean, in a couple weeks, we're going to be playing a preseason game and going to Arizona, and then the season's going to start. So this is all about preparation. But I think the one thing that jumps out at me that I'm going to be watching, especially early on, Erin, is what's going to happen with the offensive line. And it begins with, obviously, what happened in the news last week with Ryan Ramczyk, who is going to be out for the season. And that's just been a mainstay on the right side of the Saints offensive line for many years now, and just he's been an anchor at right tackle. So you're talking about domino effects and who's going to now play right tackle, and are you going to put your rookie at left tackle? It's just, there's a lot of moving parts, and that it's really the most important position other than quarterback on the field, in my opinion. And to have it being a little in flux at this particular time could be a little concerning, but who knows? You're going to have guys hopefully step up and get a lot of reps in during training camp and get ready for the year. But I think, to me, that is the one thing that we're really going to be keeping a close eye on during this camp.
It was something that they started working on earlier this summer with OTAs and then mini camp, having their first-round draft pick in Taliese Fuaga playing as the left tackle, who he is a natural right tackle. That's what he was drafted as. That's what he played at Oregon State, but they moved him over to the other side, and they've moved Trevor Penning from the left to the right side to kind of step in for Ryan Ramczyk. So we'll see how both of those players continue at those positions, and then we're seeing Nick Saldiveri, who was drafted last year, filling in at left guard. It's going to be a new look offensive line, so that is definitely an area of focus. But then I think there are a couple other position groups where we're still looking for some depth. I mean, the wide receivers, we know for a fact that Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed are your 1 and 2 guys, but what kind of leap do we see from A.T. Perry, who came on towards the end of the season last year? But then after that, you picked up a couple vets, but that's always kind of a fun group to watch during these practices.
No, I agree. And I think you hit it on the head, Erin. I think this is going to be, as we're going to watch, when you were talking about the offensive line and you were mentioning Trevor Penning, I think Trevor Penning is going to have a lot of eyes on him during this training camp. All the media that are going to be here covering practice every day, they're going to be focused on what he is doing. And I think it's going to be the same thing in the wide receiver room with A.T. Perry, because he showed flashes last year, but this is a season now for him. Again, he's not a wily vet, if you will, but he's been in the league for a year. He's going to be looked upon to make a big leap because of the perceived lack of depth. So I'll be very curious to see how he responds with, I would say, not pressure from around, but you've got to put a little pressure on yourself because he's got an opportunity to be on the field a lot. So we'll see what A.T. Perry has.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch that group, but we mentioned injury to Ryan Ramczyk. We know that tight end Juwan Johnson isn't going to be available here for a little bit as well. So the tight end room is looking a little sparse. I mean, especially if you take Taysom Hill and you throw him in as a utility player who we saw in so many different roles over the summer, they definitely need to find some more bodies to put in that room.
Yeah, you look at the roster and it's like, well, who is that? I mean, Foster Morrow, but the other guys, that's like kind of a who's who here. So, what are you going to do? Because look, in this offense, in the the Clint Kubiak San Francisco offense, the tight end is utilized a bunch, and that's what really makes Juwan Johnson's injury hurt, because, no pun intended, but with what Juwan Johnson brings to the table each and every day, you're going to miss that. He's just so athletic, and you're going to see those seam routes, I would imagine, throughout training camp, like we saw last training camp. But can one of these guys, Holker, Jacobson, Horsted, Hudson, can they step up and fill the void? Because you're right. I mean, it's wafer thin right now, depending on what we're going to see Taysom Hill do during training camp and how they're going to line him up.
You mentioned Clint Kubiak there, the new offensive coordinator. He has started implementing what he would like to see from the players, and he talked, over the summer. It's about managing expectations. You can't, expect everybody to hit it from day one. There's going to still be a lot of trying to figure out the different personnel and what they can do. How do they utilize somebody like Taysom Hill or Alvin Kamara as best that you can? But from what we heard from Derek Carr, he was glowing praises for Clint Kubiak and what they were doing. So that's also going to be something to see throughout camp, is how different this offense is going to look.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's what the reps are for. And look, I know they got the OTA reps and the mini camp reps, but this is going to be ratcheted up a little bit more. They're going to have a lot to learn in a very short amount of time. Like I said, you think it's a grind when you're going through it, but these practices, they just rattle off. And quite honestly, the practices nowadays aren't as long as they used to be. So you have to get a lot accomplished in a very short amount of time. And that's why OTAs and mini camp is so important for their participation, so you can at least get a start on it. But yeah, it's going to be ramped up very quickly. And look, it's an offense that really should help Derek Carr, because there's not a lot of time to sit around and think about what you're going to do. You've got specific things, and the blocking schemes are different, and you're running specific routes, be it the running back, tight ends, or wide receivers. So what's going to be important for Carr is to make those quick decisions, because this offense is really predicated on taking 2-3 steps and getting rid of the football. And again, that's going to help everybody involved, including the offensive line.
Yeah, absolutely. The offense and the changes on that side of the ball has had an effect on the defense, because it's forcing them to be on their toes a little bit more. They don't know what to expect every day. It's different for them. They used to be able to kind of sit back and practice and know exactly what the offense was going to run. So I think it's good for the defense to go up against something different, and it's an offense that we're seeing a lot more across the NFL.
I agree 100%. You took it from me. I think we've been working together too long. No, the really good part about all of this is we say it every single year in training camp. The defense is always ahead of the offense, because the defense knows what's coming at least in the first 2 weeks. They know what's coming. So now they don't know what's coming. And like you said, more of the teams in the NFL are using this offense because it is so effective. So not only are you going to be going up against a quote-unquote new offense every single day, it's going to help prepare you for the regular season, where you're going to be playing these teams that are using this offense. So I think defensively it should be a very, very productive training camp, and it can only help after every single practice and you watch film.
Absolutely. I know there's a couple areas in the secondary that still need to be figured out. We know Alontae Taylor is going to be in his second season as that slot position and something that he's continuing to grow in. But then you have Kool-Aid McKinstry, who you just drafted, who has been dealing with an injury during this offseason, should be getting back on the field here shortly. So how does he fit in with the cornerbacks? And then you move even further back to the safeties, and you have Tyrann Mathieu. Is it going to be Jordan Howden? Is it going to be Jonathan Abram? Who is going to be the other guy next to him? So there's some things to figure out on that side of the ball as well.
Look, let's be honest, Erin, it's all predicated on Marshon Lattimore and his health. I mean, you think about what we saw last year at this time, even though we hadn't started practice yet. I write the 3 observations during training camp every day for NewOrleansSaints.com. And at the end of training camp, I do an offensive player training camp and a defensive player. Last year, the offensive player for me was Juwan Johnson. The defensive player was Marshon Lattimore because of the way he looked each and every practice. He was dominant out there at times. I mean, it was literally Lattimore Island. I mean, if a pass went his way, it was very rare that it was completed. So you're talking about taking one half of the field out of play for the opposing offense. If he can stay on the field, then I think everything else falls into place. Look, pretty sure that Paulson Adebo is going to be on the other side from him. You mentioned Alontae Taylor, who is still trying to find his way into being that slot corner, so he should be a little more comfortable. The safety position, like you said, it's going to be, I think, a little bit in flux. So you're going to go with the young kid in Howden. Badger's going to be back there, but that's a whole another issue as well. So, but that's what training camp is for. So, but again, going back to the original point, it's all about Lattimore and staying on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, health is a big factor in any NFL
Always
season. I don't know. The one thing that we really don't know what it's going to look like is still the new kickoff rules and the returns and who's going to be back there as the returners, because we saw 2 returners during camp, and it was people like Taysom Hill and Chris Olave, and you're kind of like, what is this going to be? And that's a huge question mark, and something that, special teams coordinator Darren Rizzi said we're not really going to have a good grasp on until the preseason games. And for once, the preseason games really matter for some reason.
You know what the interesting thing is when, this is talking to someone who watches every rep during training camp, and we've done it for the last few years. The media kind of takes a break when they start doing kickoffs and special teams and punt returns and stuff like that. We're actually going to pay attention to this. When we were watching it during minicamp, it really, really is tailored to the return team. It is going to be an advantage for the teams that figure it out. But, we haven't seen it now in about, a month. So we're going to have to kind of refresh ourselves watching it every day. But it is definitely tailored to the offense. And the teams that are going to figure this out quickly are going to have a major advantage going into the first game of the season.
Well, we're going to have that first game against the Cardinals a couple weeks, so we'll have 2 weeks of practice before they do get into a game action, and then you have the joint practices with the 49ers, who obviously did very well last season, and those are usually the most exciting times during training camp because you're getting the ones versus the ones. You're going up against somebody else. You're getting to really test your starting lineup early here. So I don't know, what do you like about those practices and going up against the 49ers?
Well, the joint practices are really, to me, the best part of training camp. Because you mentioned it. You've got 1s-on-1s, 2s-on-2s, and they're going, they're not going at it like it was a regular season game.
There's always a fight, though. They definitely go at it.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. But it's also the third preseason game. Now, in the past, or actually the second preseason game, in the past, it was the third preseason game where it was pretty much a dress rehearsal for the regular season. If you go back the last couple years, we were in Green Bay 2 years ago, and then last year we were out here against the Chargers in Costa Mesa. Those two joint practices were everything, because when you actually got to the preseason game, none of the regulars played. So that's what you love about it, is you're actually seeing ones-on-ones in pretty much full speed going at it. And each team and each side of the ball, they're trying to prove something to the other team. So is it a quote-unquote preseason game? But you could take more out of the joint practices than you can the actual game itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be those joint practices. They will be here in Irvine, and then the team will head up to play the 49ers for the second preseason game, and then we will make our return to New Orleans, have a week of practice there, and then they'll take on the Titans there in week 3 of the preseason. And we'll get in front of our fans. We'll be out at Tulane. We'll have an open practice at the Dome, so it should be a lot of fun. Definitely miss having all of the fans around. I know the team does as well. Unfortunately, this is just a necessity with the renovations going on back in New Orleans. But, hey, we got you covered. Todd, JD is here as well, and myself. Every day we'll be out here. Again, we'll have the live show on Your View. JD will have articles with the news of the day, and we'll hit you with the podcast after every practice. So stay tuned, NewOrleansSaints.com.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Saints podcast. Join us 3 times per week on NewOrleansSaints.com, the Saints mobile app, or you can download the podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Saints podcast.